New York did not collapse into mafia control. It adjusted to it. The transition was so subtle that most people never noticed it happening, only realizing much later that decisions affecting entire industries had stopped being made in public offices and started being settled elsewhere. By the late 1970s, power in the city no longer announced itself with violence or spectacle. It moved quietly, embedded in contracts, schedules, and approvals that shaped daily life without ever appearing criminal. The Gambino crime family did not conquer New York by force. It absorbed it by function. The city itself made this possible. Years of financial mismanagement and political exhaustion had left New York fragile. Bankruptcy loomed openly. Infrastructure aged faster than it could be repaired. Crime became visible, chaotic, and loud, distracting attention from deeper vulnerabilities. While police focused on street violence, the true struggle for control unfolded in offices, union halls, and construction sites where money moved slowly but decisively. In moments of instability, people do not seek morality. They seek reliability. The Gambinos understood this better than anyone. Long before the late 1970s, the family had already positioned itself for dominance. Carlo Gambino had never been interested in moments of triumph. He preferred eras of quiet certainty. He survived not because he was the strongest or most feared, but because he refused to act until conditions favored him absolutely. He avoided wars, avoided publicity, and avoided alliances that demanded attention. His strength was patience, and patience outlasts violence every time. While other mafia leaders pursued power through reputation, Gambino pursued permanence. He placed loyal men into unions, industries, and transportation long before those sectors became critical. He cultivated relationships that required no reminders. He understood that influence works best when those under it believe it is normal. By the time the American Mafia reached its most organized phase, Gambino had already reduced crime into administration. His death in 1976 did not create uncertainty. It revealed preparation. The succession plan did not rely on popularity or fear. It relied on continuity. Paul Castellano was not chosen because he inspired loyalty from the streets. He was chosen because he understood structure. Castellano believed that the future of organized crime lay not in dominating neighborhoods but in controlling processes. He saw violence as inefficient and exposure as fatal. Under his leadership, the Gambino family did not become softer. It became harder to detect. Castellano ruled from distance, physically and psychologically. He did not need to be present to be obeyed. Decisions passed through layers designed to protect him from proximity. This insulation was not arrogance, it was adaptation. Law enforcement had grown more sophisticated. Wiretaps, surveillance, and financial tracking were improving. Castellano responded by increasing separation between leadership and action. Crime became indirect. Responsibility became diffuse. Accountability vanished into bureaucracy. This transformation reached its most powerful expression in construction. New York was rebuilding itself at scale, and rebuilding required coordination. Concrete deliveries could not be delayed. Labor schedules could not shift unpredictably. Financing demanded stability. The Gambinos recognized that whoever controlled these variables controlled the entire process. Instead of intimidating individual contractors, they standardized compliance. A closed network of approved companies emerged, each protected from competition and guaranteed contracts at inflated prices. Developers did not need threats to understand the arrangement. Delays cost more than cooperation. Resistance destroyed timelines. Obedience preserved profits. The system enforced itself. Labor unions completed the design. Control over labor meant control over time, and time is the most expensive commodity in construction. A single work stoppage could bleed a project dry. Union leaders aligned with the family ensured predictability for those who complied. The absence of disruption became the reward. The presence of disruption became the warning. This structure produced something rare in criminal enterprises: consistency. Revenue arrived steadily. Disputes declined. Public attention shifted elsewhere. While other families struggled with internal conflict or visibility, the Gambinos reduced friction. They had created a model where crime was no longer an event. It was a condition. The Mafia Commission still existed, but equality was theoretical. Influence followed results. The Gambinos generated more money, controlled more territory, and caused fewer problems. Their opinions carried weight not because they demanded it, but because ignoring them was irrational. Stability benefits everyone, and the Gambinos delivered it. What made this era extraordinary was how little blood accompanied it. Murders declined not because the family lacked power, but because it no longer needed to demonstrate it. Castellano understood that fear attracts attention, but dependency creates silence. Businesses that relied on Gambino-controlled systems could not afford disruption. Their success became tied to the family's continuity. By the late 1970s, the Gambino crime family had reached a level of dominance that did not resemble criminal rule. It resembled governance. The city functioned because systems functioned, and the systems functioned because the Gambinos allowed them to. Their presence was felt most strongly in its absence. When things ran smoothly, no one asked why. Yet success changes expectations. As profits grew and leadership retreated further from street-level operations, resentment quietly accumulated. Castellano's vision favored insulation over recognition. Loyalty became transactional. Distance replaced familiarity. The structure was flawless, but human ambition does not respect structure forever. Still, during this period, no rival came close. The Gambino family was not merely the most powerful mafia organization in New York. It was the most organized criminal enterprise in the country. Its influence extended into industries that shaped daily life. Its leadership avoided exposure. Its revenue dwarfed competitors. This was the peak, not dramatic, not violent, not celebrated, but absolute. New York did not know it was being ruled because nothing seemed out of control. And that was the point. Power changes shape as it grows. What begins as influence becomes expectation, and expectation eventually becomes entitlement. By the time the Gambino crime family reached its quiet peak in the late 1970s, the system that had delivered stability and wealth had also begun to harden. What once felt like precision now felt like distance. What once felt like order now felt imposed. The family was not weakening, but it was no longer speaking the same language to all of its own people. Paul Castellano believed that efficiency required separation. He trusted numbers more than loyalty displays, insulation more than proximity. From his perspective, the family was operating exactly as it should. Profits were consistent. Violence was minimized. Law enforcement pressure remained diffuse. In his mind, this confirmed the correctness of his model. Yet for men who lived closer to the street, power without presence felt like neglect. The old mafia structure depended on visibility. Bosses were seen. Authority was reinforced through personal contact. Respect was not abstract. Castellano broke that rhythm. He did not attend social clubs. He did not walk neighborhoods. Orders arrived indirectly, stripped of explanation and context. To some, this felt less like leadership and more like management by decree. Money continued to flow, but recognition did not. Street-level crews, the men who enforced rules and collected payments, began to feel disconnected from the benefits of the empire they sustained. They saw billions moving through industries they protected, yet their own status remained unchanged. Promotion slowed. Access narrowed. Castellano's inner circle favored loyalty measured through obedience, not initiative. This approach preserved control, but it also compressed ambition into silence. Silence is never empty for long. John Gotti emerged from this environment not as an outsider but as a product of it. He understood the streets because he lived in them. He understood loyalty because he cultivated it directly. Gotti did not initially challenge Castellano's authority. He challenged its absence. He filled the space Castellano left open. Unlike Castellano, Gotti was visible. He attended social clubs. He knew names, faces, and histories. He rewarded loyalty immediately. He spoke the language of respect that street-level operators recognized. This did not make him more powerful than Castellano. It made him more present. Presence creates allegiance long before it creates rebellion. The Gambino system still functioned perfectly on paper. Construction contracts were secured. Union control remained intact. Revenue streams showed no signs of disruption. To outsiders, the family appeared stronger than ever. Law enforcement saw stability and assumed discipline. They did not see the subtle shift in emotional gravity inside the organization. Castellano ruled upward, protecting the structure. Gotti ruled downward, cultivating the base. This divergence did not produce immediate conflict because it did not need to. Castellano's authority was institutional. Gotti's influence was relational. For a time, both could exist without collision, but power does not tolerate duplication indefinitely. At the same time, external pressure was evolving. Federal investigators were beginning to understand that traditional policing could not dismantle organizations like the Gambinos. Street arrests achieved nothing. Individual prosecutions changed no systems. The response was structural: long-term surveillance, financial analysis, and the strategic use of conspiracy laws that treated organizations as entities rather than collections of individuals. Castellano sensed this shift and responded by further distancing himself from exposure. Meetings became rarer. Layers increased. Decision-making centralized. This protected him legally, but it deepened the psychological gap between leadership and enforcement. Meanwhile, Gotti's reputation grew quietly, not through spectacle but through consistency. He resolved disputes personally. He ensured money moved downward as well as upward. He made himself available. These actions did not violate rules. They fulfilled expectations that Castellano had abandoned. The family was no longer unified by a single vision of authority. It was unified by structure, but divided by experience. Yet even as internal tension increased, the Gambino crime family remained dominant. Rivals did not challenge its territory. The commission continued to treat it as a stabilizing force. Businesses dependent on its systems remained compliant. From the outside, nothing appeared wrong. That illusion was dangerous. Power is most vulnerable when it appears permanent. Castellano believed that the system itself would enforce loyalty. He underestimated how much loyalty depends on recognition. Gotti understood this instinctively. He did not need to challenge Castellano directly. He only needed to wait until ambition reached a critical mass. By the early 1980s, the Gambino family stood at a crossroads it did not recognize. It had achieved maximum efficiency and minimum visibility. It had reduced crime into process and leadership into abstraction. The empire was intact, but the human element was fraying. The conflict that would follow was not ideological, it was structural. It was the collision between two models of power, one built on distance and insulation, the other built on presence and loyalty. Both had worked. They simply could not coexist forever. The system that had made the Gambinos untouchable was about to be tested not by rivals or police, but by ambition rising from within. And when that test arrived, it would not announce itself with warning. Power rarely collapses under pressure. It collapses under miscalculation. By the early 1980s, the Gambino crime family had insulated itself so thoroughly from outside threats that it no longer measured danger correctly inside its own walls. The structure remained intact. The revenue streams continued uninterrupted. The family still stood above all others in New York. Yet the very success of the system had convinced its leadership that the system itself was unbreakable. Paul Castellano believed that authority flowed downward automatically. He had inherited an empire designed to function without constant supervision, and he trusted that design completely. From his perspective, loyalty was a byproduct of order. If the structure worked, the people within it would comply. This belief was logical, efficient, and deeply flawed, because loyalty is not sustained by logic. Castellano's increasing isolation reinforced his confidence. Protected by layers of intermediaries, he saw only outcomes, not attitudes. Financial reports remained strong. No crews openly rebelled. No rival families tested Gambino territory. The absence of visible problems was interpreted as confirmation of control. Castellano did not see absence as distance. He saw it as stability. John Gotti saw something else entirely. From his position on the street, Gotti observed the erosion of emotional loyalty. He saw crews that obeyed because they had to, not because they believed. He saw ambition with nowhere to go and resentment with no outlet. Most importantly, he saw opportunity created not by weakness, but by neglect. Castellano had not lost power. He had removed himself from the mechanisms that maintained it. The tension remained invisible because it did not express itself as defiance. There were no missed payments, no open challenges, no breakdowns in discipline. Everything continued to function, but function alone does not equal allegiance. Gotti understood that the moment Castellano appeared vulnerable, loyalty would shift rapidly. That moment came not through a loss of control, but through a loss of perception. Castellano's increasing reliance on formal processes created blind spots. Decisions that affected street crews were made without consultation. Promotions stalled. Recognition narrowed. The leadership circle shrank. Castellano believed this consolidation improved security. In reality, it concentrated resentment. At the same time, federal investigations were accelerating. Law enforcement had begun to map the Mafia not as individual criminals, but as interconnected systems. Long-term wiretaps, surveillance operations, and the growing use of racketeering statutes posed a new kind of threat. Castellano responded as he always had, by increasing distance. This further alienated the street. Gotti, meanwhile, did not need to act. He only needed to remain visible. He attended gatherings. He listened. He distributed money. He reinforced the traditional Mafia values that Castellano had deprioritized. He did not openly criticize leadership. He positioned himself as the embodiment of what leadership used to feel like. This made him dangerous without making him visible. The Gambino family now contained two centers of gravity, one institutional, one personal, one silent, one present. Neither openly opposed the other, but both competed for allegiance. This balance could not hold indefinitely. The miscalculation came when Castellano underestimated how quickly loyalty could realign once the perception of inevitability cracked. He believed that his authority was protected by tradition and structure. He failed to recognize that tradition only holds when it is reinforced emotionally. The decision that followed did not arise from chaos or desperation. It arose from confidence on both sides. Castellano continued to rule as if distance were strength. Gotti continued to build loyalty as if patience were enough. Neither believed the other would cross the line. That belief was shared, and it was wrong. When the moment arrived, it did not unfold gradually. It arrived suddenly, decisively, and publicly. The act that followed shattered the illusion that invisibility guaranteed safety. It transformed the Gambino family from an unseen system into a spectacle. In one instant, the rules that had governed decades of quiet dominance were broken. The assassination of Paul Castellano was not just a change in leadership. It was a rejection of a model. It declared that presence would replace distance, visibility would replace insulation, and personality would replace process. It ended an era defined by silence and initiated one defined by exposure. The Gambino crime family did not fall that night, but it changed irreversibly. What followed was not decline in the traditional sense. It was transformation. The family became louder, more recognizable, and more vulnerable. The very qualities that had once made it untouchable were abandoned in favor of immediate control. Law enforcement, long frustrated by invisibility, finally had a target it could see. The empire that had ruled without being noticed had revealed itself. And once seen, it could be pursued. The moment the Gambino crime family became visible, its advantage disappeared. What had protected the organization for decades was not strength alone, but ambiguity. Power had flowed through systems that left no clear target. Leadership had existed behind layers that blurred responsibility. Once those layers were removed, the family entered a world it had deliberately avoided, a world where attention was lethal. John Gotti's rise satisfied a hunger inside the family that Castellano's model had ignored. He was present. He was recognizable. He rewarded loyalty publicly. For men who had felt invisible under a distant hierarchy, this felt like restoration. Authority returned to the streets, and with it came emotion, pride, and personal allegiance. The family rallied quickly, but rallies attract witnesses. The Gambino organization did not become weaker overnight. Its revenue streams did not collapse. Its control of construction, unions, and traditional rackets remained substantial. What changed was how that power was expressed. Decisions were no longer absorbed quietly into systems. They were embodied in a single figure whose presence could be tracked, photographed, recorded, and targeted. Visibility replaced insulation. Law enforcement understood the shift immediately. For years, investigators had struggled to penetrate an organization that refused to present itself. Now the leadership appeared regularly, spoke openly, and occupied identifiable spaces. Surveillance became simpler. Patterns emerged. The very charisma that solidified internal loyalty provided external access. The Gotti era inverted Castellano's priorities. Where Castellano avoided spectacle, Gotti tolerated it. Where Castellano minimized exposure, Gotti accepted risk. This was not recklessness in the moment. It was confidence born from early success. Acquittals reinforced belief in invulnerability. Media attention was interpreted as proof of control rather than vulnerability. But attention compounds. Federal prosecutors had refined their strategy. They no longer needed direct evidence of individual crimes. They needed proof of participation in an enterprise. Long-term investigations linked conversations, movements, and financial flows. The Gambino family, once fragmented intentionally to prevent such linkage, now revolved around a visible center. The RICO statute, designed precisely for organizations like this, found its ideal subject. The same loyalty that elevated Gotti now bound others to his fate. Silence became harder to maintain. The family's traditional strength, discipline, eroded under pressure as exposure increased. Informants emerged not from weakness, but from inevitability. The system that once absorbed risk now concentrated it. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Gambino crime family was no longer operating beyond the reach of the state. It was operating within its focus. Arrests multiplied. Convictions followed. Leadership turned over faster than stability could be restored. The empire did not vanish, but it contracted. What was lost could not be rebuilt. The era of invisible dominance depended on conditions that no longer existed. Law enforcement had adapted. Legal frameworks had evolved. Technology had advanced. Most importantly, the family itself had changed. It could no longer return to a model of silence after embracing visibility. Once attention is normalized, withdrawal appears suspicious. The Gambino family survived, as all large organizations do, by adapting. But survival is not the same as dominance. The family remained a powerful criminal entity, yet it never again occupied the position it held in the late 1970s and early 1980s. That peak required a perfect alignment of leadership philosophy, economic opportunity, and institutional blind spots. Those conditions were unique, and they passed. The story of the Gambino crime family is not one of sudden collapse. It is a study in how power evolves, how success reshapes behavior, and how the qualities that create dominance can also destroy it when circumstances change. Their rise was quiet, their rule nearly invisible, and their fall not dramatic but inevitable once attention arrived. New York continued to function. Buildings rose, unions negotiated, industries adapted. The city did not remember who once organized it from the shadows, but the legacy remained embedded in laws written, tactics developed, and institutions transformed in response to what the Gambinos had achieved. They proved that organized crime could govern without appearing to govern. They also proved that once governance becomes visible, it becomes accountable. The Gambino crime family did not lose power because it was challenged. It lost power because it was finally seen. And in that visibility, the quiet empire ended.